Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to do another day of review and just kind of go over a couple of activities that we did in class today. All right, so just as a reminder, these are the do's and the don'ts for those of you taking the paper and pencil test. So today's activities, we're going to focus in on the kind of a theme or a narrative that runs through our course from the earliest of topics up until the very last topics, which is migrations. So just look at an approach to dealing with that, and then really kind of making causation chains and arguments around technology and scientific discoveries and the such, and just as a way to study and prepare for the test. We also today we watched. I have a school appropriate version of the Bill Wirtz video, History of Japan. So we watched a school edited or a school appropriate version of that, which I have just that image there from that. So there's that. All right. So in class, the students got into their groups from a few days ago. We had drawn a map where we were identifying cities and monumental architecture, and and just kind of just trying to work around. Can you identify where they are, the significance, et cetera, et cetera? So using that map, I presented just a handful of migrations that we cover in this class, and I did it chronologically. So these are like period 1200 to 1450. Start getting into the 1450 to 1750, 1750 to 1900. And I really don't do any 1900 to presents, but because we just covered those. But I mean, obviously, you could talk about second migrations. You could talk about from South Asians from Uganda to Britain. You could talk. We just did 20th century, so 21st century. So I didn't put them on there for now. All right. So what we did in class is, I have individual groups. Choose simply one of these, whatever, right? Choose any one you want to, and then identify where they are, where they're migrating from, where they're migrating to, and then do push and pull factors. And then, if you can, try to show a little complexity or complex understanding of this topic. So, like, what I mean by that is, let's say we're doing, chattel slavery, for example. All right, so let's just kind of draw the map out of what the kids would have. So yeah, in class they've got these massive maps that that we've been working with in class. So let's see. Let's just kind of draw Americas. South America. Okay. So let's just say I get a little bit of the map. All right. So if we're talking about chattel slavery, right, Atlantic system, Atlantic system, chattel slavery. All right. So first off, where are the origin points? Where are destinations? All right. So when we start talking about this in class, we generally start talking about Congo, right? It's kind of an origin point. And where are they going? I probably should draw my map so you could actually see. But places like Brazil early on are going to be a primary receiver. All right, so, and I did a bad map, so I apologize. All right, so places like Brazil, obviously the Caribbean is eventually going to become a major destination. So what I had kids in class do, right, with this activity is once you identify sending nations, receiving nations. Identify some push factors. Identify some push factors and identify some pull factors. All right, so what are, and really try to get 2 solid, maybe 3 if you can. All right, so if we're talking about Atlantic system with chattel slavery, how do individuals, how do they find themselves on the boat, right, in shackles? So identify like a specific kingdom. Identify ways in which they were acquired. Identify motivations for groups, like the monarchy within the Congo. What are they getting out of it? Okay. What's kind of the overall, the kind of overall motivation there. Once they receive those things, right, is that intensifying it or not? What would happen if the individuals who were, the established part of this exchange began charging too much, right? What would the Europeans in that situation do in response to that? That's a kind of that is part of having a basic understanding of the push factors that were involved, right? And then the pull factors, right? What are the pull factors? Right. So what kind of economic system is creating the preconditions for this? What do we call the specific locations in which individuals who were enslaved were brought to? Right. So what other factors resulted in the need for labor coming from Africa as opposed to other places? Right. So all of these would be our pull factors. And what I tell students in class is, if you have to know where you are in your studying for the exam. If you are struggling to, remember who Akbar is, then being able to identify a push and a pull factor is probably good, kind of a good goal. If you can work through the complexities associated with religious toleration of the Mughal Empire, and talk a little bit about Akbar's policies and his council, and explain what all that is, and say that was a continuity throughout much of the Mughal Empire, and then talk about how that changes with the Aurangzeb and get into the religious persecution of Hindus, and then talk about one of the effects of that change being the rise of the Maratha Confederacy. And I mean, if that's where you are at in your studying, then maybe you can take this another step. All right, so maybe you can, kind of take this and look at the demographic effects. All right, demographic. All right, the demographic impacts. Let's just put it that way. All right, the demographic impacts. Maybe on the sending countries. All right. All right, the sending nations. So talk about things like population. Right. So I would say population growth, but in this case here, it'd be population stagnation. Right. Why do we see population stagnation? What are the gender impacts? Right. And of course, you can talk about just straight up numbers, but you can also talk about things like matriarchy. Right. It's you could talk about overall stability of states, right? Within places that are being directly impacted by this. All right. So you could do that, or you could focus in on receiving nations. Right, on receiving nations, or receiving nations, probably not the right word, but receiving societies. Right, look at the impact on receiving societies. So you kind of run this out. Maybe you want to focus on things like cultural diffusion. All right, what's one way you can kind of look at that? You might want to look at things like, foods brought, right, by African enslaved populations or persons. Right? Maybe you could identify one or two of these, like rice or okra. Okay, so maybe that's one way you could kind of angle this, right, to show a little complex understanding. Or maybe you want to talk, and provide some examples of syncretism. Yeah, maybe you want to talk about, what happens with and how maroon societies get formed, right? And, maroon societies give rise to syncretic forms of religion, such as, Vundun or Santiara or, I don't know, Condomble. Okay, so so being able to make those kinds of connections might be kind of a way if you are studying, trying to think about complexity and ways that you might be able to apply these kinds of things. It's just just another review idea. All right, so I had we had worked on like a single one of these in class. So the different groups, they picked whatever they want to. They came up with push-pull factors, and were encouraged to kind of go a little bit beyond if they felt like they were up to it. All right. So some good ones that I got in class so far. The rise of the Kangani system was good to see, right? Good to hear. But yeah, so it's just a review idea. Another review idea that we did today is kind of looking at the themes, right? Looking at the themes of this course, and of course, quite often the LEQs have asked students to provide examples from themes. So one theme that is relatively new to the course is the theme of technology. So I went and picked out some technological advances throughout this course, and ask kids to just kind of take one of these things, and if you want to kind of LEQ prep for the potential of this, you could do pick out what you think is like maybe the single most important technological innovation from each time period, and try to run that out, and maybe try to do a causation chain or something like that. So, like for example, the example I gave in class today is the printing press. All right, so what are we doing with the printing press? So what we're doing is, all right, just taking it, all right, printing press. All right, so first off, let's identify where it's developed and who and all that. So if you're thinking, maybe Korea, movable type, and Buddhism and Buddhist texts, and that's all good. But that's not the one that I'm referring to in our course, right? So what am I talking about? This is the Gutenberg, right? So Johann Gutenberg. I'm going to put 1450s, right? So, I mean, I used to see 1455 all the time as far as when he makes his first 200 Bibles, or the run of 200 Bibles, the Gutenberg Bible. And then I've seen a couple of years earlier. So let's just say mid 1450s. Just not be totally wrong on this. So where is he? This is modern Germany. Obviously, Germany doesn't exist until 1871. So these are, Holy Roman Empire, German princes, princedoms, right? So Central Europe is where we're talking about. All right, so this is kind of our starting point. So this is the technology, how could we contextualize this? All right, so all right, let's kind of focus on contextualize. All right. So how do we get there? Maybe you want to talk about paper, right? Because we're not printing press, we're not printing on vellum, animal skins or anything like that. We're printing on paper. So maybe you want to contextualize this by talking about the diffusion of paper. So paper comes from China, diffuses to the Middle East. Was that Battle of Talas, 751 maybe? 750s, I think it was 751. So that's the Battle of Talas, and it makes its way through the Middle East, and it kind of gives rise to so we see paper mills, right? Paper mills, all these paper technology diffusing their way into Europe during the medieval period from Dar al-Islam. All right, so you can contextualize this by talking about paper. You can also contextualize this by talking about kind of the economic growth, right? The economic growth of the late medieval period, scholasticism, right? The scholasticism movement that we see as knowledge is being diffused from Al-Andalus into places like the University of Paris. All right, so there's a couple of ways you can contextualize this, and then when we talk about this, all right, so once this thing gets developed, we're talking about, what are some of the effects of this? Well, first and foremost, we can say we have over 1,000 printers by 1,500 in Europe, right? So we see printing take off very, very quickly. And of course, with it, paper mills and the such. Well, right? But you can also make these connections of these historical events, right? So let's kind of put this out there, that there are some major things that may have never happened, like the Protestant Reformation. All right? Kind of hard to see the Protestant Reformation happening without this. Scientific revolution. All right? If you want to, take this down the line a little further, Enlightenment, right? Which means there is no United States. There's no American Revolution without the printing press. So if I want to make these claims, these assertions that the Atlantic Revolutions, is being caused by this thing, I need to obviously fill those gaps. I need to explain that thing. So how does the printing press result in the creation of the United States of America? Let's kind of just take that one. So what are the kind of short-term effects of this going to be? Right, so these are kind of long-term, and then this would be short-term. Right, so what's going to happen immediately? So we have increased access to books, for one thing, right? Books can now be mass-produced. All right, so overall number of books is increasing. We're also seeing here, right, price, availability, right? They're much more affordable. So as books are mass-produced, the price of them will increase. Will decrease. And this is also going to result in an increase in literacy rates. It is very helpful if you are trying to learn how to read to have a book, right? To have access to a book. So greater access to books, greater affordability, greater number of books is going to result in increased literacy rates. All right. So that if you kind of grasp that, all right. You can then kind of jump this to what the Protestant Reformation is about. I mean, what is the Protestant Reformation about? This is about being able to have access to, to a Bible of your own, being able to read that yourself, being able to interpret that yourself, and not being dependent upon the interpretation and dogma, right, of the established church. And, increasing literacy rates is a key component to that. And literacy is intertwined with Protestantism, especially some forms of it, such as Calvinism. Right, so you can easily make those connections. You could also say that the 95 Thesis that was posted on Wittenberg Cathedral, that information spread faster than the church could stop it, right? So, that list was being mass produced, that critique was being mass produced. And, in the church, obviously creates the index as part of their way to try to deal with this. So how do all these ideas survive, and how do these books survive? Because they're being mass produced, right? So say the same thing for the scientific revolution, or even the Enlightenment, right? So when you talk about the Enlightenment ideas, you take people, take the writers of this. Most of the books are going to be banned in France. So how does the French Revolution happen if no one has access to these ideas? It's because they do have access to these ideas. Because books are being mass produced in places like Switzerland or the Netherlands, and then they're being smuggled into France. And so when you're talking about mass production of things, it makes it very difficult to censor if the numbers that are being brought in are simply overwhelming. So the mass production of these ideas, combined with increasing literacy and people being able to interpret these for themselves, will eventually result in take us there. All right. So you need to. That's kind of just one idea of what we did in class today. So can you run this kind of stuff for the camel saddle and talk about West Africa and what the implications were for West Africa because of the camel saddle, right? Just once again, we're just going over ideas to study with. If you're beyond simply learning about who people like Akbar are, for example, all right? But creating these kinds of causation chains and the such. Okay, so that's what we do for today. That is all.